Good afternoon again. This afternoon we're on the second part of Unit 1 of the IQA Award. As we left off on Tuesday, I was partway through the IQA presentation. I will continue that in a few moments and also look at the assignment brief that I originally wrote for that, which I wanted to bring up. I've also put in this time internal verification strategy, so you can see what one should look like, what it will contain, and the type of things that the IQA is then responsible for. So the IQA presentation that I delivered initially, which is this one thing. That's it. Cool. Going on from 3.1, where we're up to where we were up to, we now have sampling plans, assessment, assessor qualification and experience, control units, observation, and the use of audio-visual technology. A lot of the time, a plan has got to be made that you're going to sample the units. As I mentioned at the back end of the last session, sampling plans should be made roughly for every 3 months for students that are registered on a particular qualification. Not all units of every student need to be sampled, just a percentage of them that covers the whole unit across the whole of the units across the qualification, but it may be 2 or 3 units from each student, but different ones. Having said that, there will be, or usually it is better to, or good practice, to have a control unit. So that, to give you an example, on the level 5 teaching and learning program that some of you are on, the unit 1 is probably the biggest unit in the qualification. It's got about 8 learning objectives in it, and it has a lot of elements within those. Some of those overlap into the other units, as I've said before, but if you use Unit 1 as a sample to see that the assessors on that particular unit are assessing the same way and to the same standard during any standardization things, that can be classed as control unit. Words, if everybody is assessing the same way and to the same, it's more than likely it's going to cross units. Observation. Yeah, that's not observation of the assessor on the candidate, that is the observer of the IQA on the assessor. Periodically, and this is in the sampling plan, which I'm going to cover in a minute. The strategy that I'm going to cover in a minute. If you've got a new assessor who's not done any assessment before, he will probably need, or she will need, more support in that first period. So where you're probably doing an observation with a qualified and an experienced assessor probably once a year, you may need to do an observation probably 2 or 3 times a year with a new assessor until they gain the confidence with your support to be able to say, yeah, I'm okay now, I know what I'm doing, I understand the system properly, and I feel confident. The use of audio-visual technology, it's becoming more and more used now. Of course, we've got the electronic portfolio now where you don't really need to put a paper-based one together at all. If you're doing a professional discussion as part of the assessment process, of course, that can be done either as a video or an audio to meet the standards that's required. Appeals procedures, assessor communication, standards, learning objectives, education. Every system has an appeals procedure. If a student, for instance, is not happy with an assessment that has been made, he first takes that up with the assessor himself. If they cannot agree at that point, the candidate or the learner can take it to the IQA, who will then adjudicate between the assessor and the student, and will either come up, with the on the side of the assessor or on the learner, in which case the assessor will take advice. If the IQA is satisfied the assessor was right, then the learner can in fact take it right back to the awarding body if he wishes to. It's never happened. I've never known it go that far, but that's the procedure. It works backwards towards the awarding body. Communications with the assessor. How you would take that forward with if you disagreed with the assessor, then you would have to take that forward with the assessor, and without the learner being there, obviously. Standards. Yeah, you get often qualifications of different levels to assess. So you'll be assessing, say, a level 5, and then you may be assessing a level 7 or level 6 or a level 3. You need to assess at that level. So you take advice from the awarding body on what they have put down to be acceptable at a specific level, and it either meets it or it doesn't, quite honestly. It's getting more muddied now with this pass merit and distinction, which I was before I don't agree with, because it then muddies the water as to what standard. Is it a pass? Does it reach the standard for a merit, or does it reach the standard for distinction? It's a moot point. The unit standards themselves are the criteria that you work to. The documentary evidence is what you put together, either electronically or in hard copy. It actually looks at the scope of the evidence. Quite a lot of qualifications will put in the type of thing that should be in, that you should be discussing within the work that you're producing. I've put in on a lot of these, of course, is suggested evidence. Scope of evidence, the width or breadth or depth, whichever way you want to term it, of the evidence, the amount of evidence that you've got, whether it's sufficient. Is it valid? Do we know it's from the student, and is it authentic? Has the student done it himself? Assessor support. Usually, when assessors start to become assessors, a training needs analysis or TNA will be done by the IQA in conjunction with the manager of the section and determine what specific training or further training assessors need. That can be given verbally, or it can be given as a written and kept and signed off when you've completed a certain part of the training. IQA reports. This is the IQA report back to the assessor. It's usually a formality. If everything's gone to plan, the work's been done, it's achieved the standard, and the feedback that's to the student reflects all that, then the IQA report will just say that and no further action to be taken. If there are deficiencies, or the IQA thinks there are deficiencies in the work, or in fact if it's an early formative assessment, the IQA may make some comments in his feedback to the assessor on his report to watch something, be aware of this or be aware of that. Again, interpreting standards. Most of the standards have interpretation with if you're unsure about it. But again, it's the IQA's job to liaise with the awarding body to make sure that the interpretation is correct and then feed that back to the assessor. Standardization. This comes back to an IQA strategy statement, standardization meetings which I've discussed before, and agreeing assessment methods and requirements. This is again, once the last slide actually has been discussed with the awarding body if there are any issues, then we agree a methods at the standardization meeting and the evidence required. At what level? Because what I would normally do with some assessors is give them a student's or a copy of a student's work and let them do an assessment on it and see the differences in opinion for the assessor on that particular piece of work, and then adjudicate between them. To be fair, on some meetings that I've had, they've been very close together and we don't have much disagreement, but they've been with experienced assessors. What tends to happen is new assessors go either one way or the other. They will either be too lenient or they'll be too strict. I find that if I am assessing a qualification for the first time and I've not used that before, I will pretty well stick to the letter of the law. That way, it would appear harsh, but at the end of the day, you've got to fit the learning objectives. If it's not achieving the learning objectives, then it doesn't pass. That's why I'm so clear about pass and not yet achieve, not fail, not yet achieve. It may be just additional work needed. Dispute meetings, records, external quality assurance body. We've mentioned it already. It's basically the procedure you go through if you've got a dispute. And again, it's rarely happens. It's not something that happens every year, never mind anything else. Reviewing your own practice is questions assessors on questions about yourself, how you interpret the standards, and referring back to the awarding body or IQA of the awarding body when there are issues that can't be resolved. Another IQA function is, of course, data collection. Oh, I'm sorry, this is covered before. I'm going back, it's jumped to the beginning of Unit 1. So I'll close that down for now. I'll open up one of the others. Down, I said. Yeah, this was the course assignment brief that I sent you all. I don't know if you all read through it or not, but basically it says about what about this unit. It's a mixture of knowledge and practice that will be used to gather the evidence you need to complete it. Follow the routes of suggested evidence available to on the Moodle platform, and I'll bring those up again in a minute anyway. This gives you a specific guide to what's required. There's also ample reading material available on there covering the knowledge-based questions. Some of the unit 2, or this unit, choose 2 of your assessors, sorry, got my tongue twisted. For this unit, choose 2 of your assessors and provide the documentary evidence that you use within the school or the college within which you work in. It will provide you with some explanation, the bulk of your evidence for this unit. There is specific guidance, element by element, as to what is required on the Moodle platform. Any further knowledge-based questions are covered in the reader material at your disposal there. Unit 2 is very much a practically based unit, and that is asking you to show where brought together this evidence for Unit 1, it will then fit into Unit 2. It should be covered by copies of your school or college's policies on the subject with some explanation. Copies of standardization meetings will be good evidence in this section. If you have training needs analysis, sampling plans, etc. These will also be useful evidence, again using complete copies of your documentation, skills documentation. Further knowledge and basic information can be accessed from PowerPoint presentations on this subject available on the Moodle platform. Any further questions, email in the usual way. But please note, copies means actual completed documents, not blank copies used as examples, because no. I can't put that down again now. This is an internal verification strategy that I produced for a college in West Lancs some time ago. It really doesn't matter. The material that's in it is applicable to just about everything. It was a standard strategy that I put forward. It looks at a whole range of the things that we have looked at for the last 2 or 3 days on the presentations. And it's a strategy of managing and sampling assessed awards, and it will be determined by size to ensure reliability, the number of experience and workload of the assessor, the number of different sites worked, rolling start-finish dates, and will be by examination, assessment records and feedback. Observations. For an experienced assessor, well, I put 2 per year on there because all the assessors were not very experienced. Even the experienced ones didn't have a lot of experience, but I kept it at 2 per year. It could be 1 for experienced assessors who've been doing it good while. I spelled that wrong, so I'm going to correct it. No. Correct. For all new assessors, 3 in the first 6 months, and 2 in the second 6 months, and 3 in the following 12 months. Those are the laid down in the strategy how the IQA needs to observe and keep an eye on, really, the assessors under his wing, if you like. As a minimum, 1 interim and 1 final internal verification on each one. 1 control unit core, samples for all candidates to ensure standardization. All records are kept in centre file. The centre file will be produced and contain a list of assessors, their qualifications and experience and NCFE. A list of registered candidates identifying the dates of registration. An overall sampling plan over a given period covering all the registered candidates. An ongoing sampling plan for formative verification of portfolios. An ongoing sampling plan for summative verification of portfolios and submitted assignments. Copies of internal verification reports to assessors with any actions and feedback. Copies of final internal verification reports to assessors with any feedback and or actions. Any actions to be cleared and recorded before external verifiers visit. That's a must. I know it's obvious, but quite often it gets forgotten that any actions need to be, outstanding actions need to be closed out before you present them to the external verifier. He or she will pick that up straight away. All records of any claim specification to be kept on file. We will work towards a standard portfolio for these awards, determining what they will contain and in what order they will appear. This was mainly initially for paper-based portfolios, but that applies to electronic ones as well. You would have to present or put together a folder with, say, Unit 1 and then Unit 2 Unit 3, Unit 4, etc. on whatever then you were using afterwards. You would do the core units first and then whatever children units fitted in afterwards. All new assessors to receive adequate induction in all processes, followed by close support. Again, there's the little word adequate in there. What is adequate? Adequate means when the assessor or new assessor feels confident enough to be able to say, right, I'm okay now. All assessors have copies of all centre assessment materials. I put TBA in there because at the time I did this, they weren't available. Copies of internal verification documents, copies of standards for each award they assess, access to training and support. To give you some background to that TBA, this was a college, quite a well-known college, I'm going to mention it, in West Lancs, who had a meeting with the external verifier from the awarding body, who had put a sanction on them to stop them claiming certification unless it had gone through the normal channels, because the internal verification was weak, poor, and not were able to set up, and some of the assessors were they didn't have the confidence to be able to do what they were supposed to do. I was asked to go. There was no strategy there. Fortunately for the college, the external verifier was known to me, and he knew me as well. And he said if I would provide him this copy of a strategy over the weekend, he would not put any further sanction on the organisation, and they will be able to register and claim certification from students. So that was fun. This is how important the strategy is from an awarding body's point of view. They want to see the machinery there within the organisation to be able to adequately cover the standards of the qualification, but also to uphold the standards of the qualification, if you understand. All portfolios presented for internal verification shall have secure storage, be logged in and out, and cleared within 3 weeks. That is the paper-based ones. There has to be some sort of time limit and some sort of control over where the material is and who's got access to it. So this strategy has 3 strands: sample assessment, monitor assessment practice, standardised assessment judgment. When new assessors join the team, propose standardised on a qualification. This is a document to be amended from time to time to comply with recommendations from external verifier or quality team. Numbered amended copies will be put in course and previous versions destroyed. That is typical audit wordage, really. It's making sure that this document is updated what it needs to be, and this document will be destroyed in terms of the new one, and that occurs, so that there is no crossover and no mistakes made. Some of you know I used to be a mechanical engineer, and the thing that could occur is that you would issue an amendment to a drawing that somebody was going to make something from, and then the copy hadn't been destroyed. Somebody ended up working to the old copy and the new amendment's not been added, and the repercussions are obvious. The same thing applies to documentation. Yeah, it needs to be auditable, and it needs to be honest, and it needs to be clear. So we all know what strategy is now, I hope. Yeah. This will be available on the platform. Close that down. Not messing with it now, I can do it afterwards. No. when it eventually opens. I'm not sure why it does this time to become more and does not open when it should do. So here I'm just going to look at the last moments now. Evaluate different techniques. Assessment including the use of technology. I haven't actually got different techniques in the knowledge base, but this is looking at of assessing, verifying a number of assessments. If you've got a small number of students on qualification, you can basically internally verify all the units right across the board, 100%. And that is what I would normally suggest doing when you've only got up to, say, up to 10 students or learners on a particular qualification. If you've got more than that, and some of the larger colleges, you may have 40, 50, 60 students on a particular level of qualification. You couldn't possibly get through all those in the time. The assessors working unit by unit, element by element, and putting the evidence together, and he's signing it off as it completes. So that's part of his day-to-day job. The IQA usually has that as a second job. He will have a full-time job. He may be teaching or doing other operations within the organisation, but IQA will be another part of it, so that he has limited time and resources in which to carry out that operation. That's when percentages start to matter, because you need to assess, you need to verify a number of assessments over a number of assessors. There may be, with those 40, 50, 60 students, there may be 5 or 6 assessors. So you need to look at probably 2 or 3 students across the board on each of those assessors, and look at, say they were doing, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 units, you would probably look at a couple of units for each student, along with the control unit. Yeah. Explain the appropriate criteria for using the judgment to judging the quality of the assessment process. The only criteria are standardization and the actual elements of the unit itself. If you work to the if you monitor them on the basis of the criteria in the qualification, is it achieving that criteria or isn't it? Don't try to measure it in terms of, again, this is why I don't like the grading. It will either achieve what's being asked for, so that's what we've covered in the slides on there, so that's why I'm just putting that bit on there. Again, summarise the types of feedback and support and advice that assessors may need to maintain and improve the quality of their assessment. If you can refer to the slides I've put in there, because we have discussed this on there, and it's looking at what you do or how you actually report back to the assessor. It will come in the form mainly of your IQA report back to them on a particular piece that you've verified on your plan. If there's something you don't agree with, then you put that in the report. The assessor, I mean, on occasions I've had assessors come back to me and say, "Oh, you're talking about? I've actually covered that here, where I've actually missed it." You've got a lot of work to do. Like I say, it's only part of you. So So consequently, you've got to get a move on to get things done, and sometimes you do miss things. So when you go back to the assessor and he comes back to you with something like that, you say, okay, yeah, sorry, I agree, I've missed that, and then I will amend the report. Again, it's coming back to records. If there's been a discussion on a particular item that's been down as an action point, if that action point is removed, then you as IQA have to remove that action point from the record so that you're now accepting what was delivered rather than still having it outstanding. Yeah. Come back to what I was saying about example again with new drawings engineering. Yeah, you must amend the record. Again, standardization requirements, we've covered that quite a bit in there, the slides in there, and again, it's looking at what you put into standardization meeting. Like I've said about control units, about different approaches to from different people at different levels, so we all assess at the same level. Again, looking at the requirements of information management, data protection, we've looked at keeping records, who should see those records. I think you say on one slide there it said it must be on the strategy, sorry, it must be kept locked and only available to certain people, and it must be in and out within a certain period. Once you look at evaluate your school's data protection policy and the procedures in relation to IQA, so the school should have a policy on that, and you need to look at that and evaluate that policy. You know, I've had trainee IQAs do this with their school and come up with finding that their policy is rather wanting and it needs updating. So that's quite a useful exercise. That. That's on it. Evaluate the legal issues, policies and procedures relevant to IQA on assessment, including health, safety and welfare. You can make a continuation of your evaluation at 5.1. 5.1 and 6, I would suggest that you run them together because they are looking at initially your school and then the wider issues around it as well. Evaluate different ways in which technology can contribute to the IQA of assessment. I'm in my 70s now. I'm not a technophile, but I'm not technical either. I use technology. There are a number of ways which other people can probably tell me how you could use, I don't know, your mobile phone and goodness knows how many more things you can do to keep control of on records of the situation. But basically, it's looking at keeping electronic records, I think, from there. So there's additional slides in the PowerPoint or the earlier PowerPoint for that to have a look at. Again, this refers to the slides, but the other bit is looking at reflective practice and continuing professional development. It's looking at, as an IQA, how much involvement do you get in the different areas. You're involved with, obviously, with assessors, you're involved with candidates as well, because usually when you observe an assessor with a particular candidate, what you would do is, you would, with that candidate, you would do a full interview with him. In fact, I have some interview sheets for IQA to ask standardised questions to candidates to make sure they were happy with the process what was going on. Explain the value of reflective practice in continuing professional development in relation to IQA. So, literally, there are models of reflection that you look at, you've looked at for the teaching course. The same things apply here. How you can improve what you do and the way you actually do it. Again, the requirements for equality and diversity and welfare are, and where appropriate, bilingualism in relation to IQA for assessment. This applies sometimes if you've got students whose English is almost a barrier to the qualification. Language can be a barrier, but in some cases it can make things extremely difficult. I've assessed work at high levels that I've turned down because, quite honestly, I couldn't understand what they were actually trying to say. In sections, you can understand what they've said, and you understand the meaning behind it, even if it's not entirely correct. But a lot of the time, I couldn't understand it at all. I've had to reject it because of that. And again, who enroll them onto that level without checking that they've got sufficient language skills to be able to cope with the work. So it's again, that's ideas for your evaluation. And again, from reflection, you can analyse ways to improve in practice in planning, delivering, assessing, inclusive teaching and learning. Yeah. There's some work in there on the additional slides on the PowerPoint. If you're going to look through those. At the end, I've just added on why does it say all there? It should say all. I'll correct that while I'm here. My computer on today. All that comes in this must be assessed using different methods of assessment of knowledge and understanding. The evidence can be presented in the form of a portfolio, which can include assessor observations, witness testimonies, worksheets, assignments, reports, professional discussions, candidate and peer reports, and RPL. Yeah, it's just a guidance. The aim of this unit is to assess the knowledge and understanding of the principles and practice that underpin internal quality assurance of assessment. And that is it. I will close the meeting today and we will start to look at IQA Unit 2, on this one. Oh, it's Unit 2 this week, next week. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget this is available on Moodle. You'll be able to, obviously nobody was able to attend today, but you will be able to listen to my droning voice and at any time you wish by accessing it from the Moodle platform. Again, thanks for listening and we'll speak again next time.